The dust devil that spiraled across the drought-cracked earth seemed to carry Trudy Morrison's dreams with it, scattering them into the merciless Colorado sky like seeds that would never find purchase in this hardened ground. She stood at the edge of her husband's grave, her arms ending just below the elbows in bandaged stumps that still burned with phantom pain from the threshing machine accident 3 months prior, watching the weeds overtake what had once been 30 acres of promising wheat. Samuel had been dead nearly a year now, his heart giving out during the brutal winter of 1883, and she had tried desperately to keep their homestead running through sheer determination until that terrible August morning when the machinery had pulled her in and changed everything. The doctor in Denver had saved her life but couldn't save her hands, and now at 24 years old, Trudy faced a future as barren as the fields around her. The neighboring ranch belonged to Asher Reed, a weathered cowboy of 28 who had built his spread from nothing but sweat and stubbornness over the past 6 years. She had noticed him watching her property lately, his dark eyes measuring the neglect creeping across her land like a slow-moving shadow. Trudy knew what people in Calico whispered behind their hands, that she would lose everything come winter, that the bank would seize the property Samuel had died trying to tame, that she would end up in some charity home in Denver or worse. The thought made her stomach twist with a bitterness that tasted like copper and defeat. She was struggling to close the gate to her chicken coop one afternoon in late September when Asher rode up on his sorrel mare, his broad-brimmed hat shading a face carved from sun and wind. He dismounted with the easy grace of a man born to the saddle and walked toward her slowly, as though approaching a wild thing that might bolt. Trudy straightened her spine and lifted her chin, ready to refuse whatever pity he brought with him. "Mrs. Morrison," he said quietly, removing his hat to reveal thick brown hair that needed cutting, "I have a proposition for you." "I do not need charity, Mr. Reed," she replied, her voice steady despite the humiliation burning through her chest. "I will manage." "I can see that," he said, and there was no mockery in his tone, only a strange gentleness that made her throat tighten. "But I am not offering charity. I am offering marriage." The words hung in the air between them like something solid, something she could reach out and touch if only she still had hands to do it with. Trudy stared at him, certain she had misheard, that the constant pain and lack of sleep had finally broken something in her mind. "You have lost your senses," she managed finally. "No, madam, I have not." Asher turned his hat in his hands, his calloused fingers working the brim in a nervous gesture that seemed at odds with his usual self-possession. "I have watched you these past months trying to do the impossible with courage that would shame most men I know. You need help and I need—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "I have built something here, but it is just land and cattle and an empty house. I would like it to be more. I would like it to be a home with a wife to share it. I can work both properties, combine them into something that could actually thrive. You would have security, a future. In return, I would have a partner, someone to build something meaningful with." "You pity me," Trudy said, and the words came out sharper than she intended, edged with all the frustration and grief she had been holding inside. "I respect you," Asher corrected, and when his eyes met hers, she saw no pity there, only an earnestness that made her breath catch. "I have watched you fight when anyone else would have surrendered. That is not someone who deserves pity. That is someone who deserves a fighting chance." Trudy turned away from him, looking across the failing fields that represented everything she and Samuel had dreamed of. The practical part of her mind, the part that had learned to calculate costs and odds during her years as a farmer's wife, told her this was the only real option she had. But the wounded part of her, the part that still grieved for Samuel and raged against the cruel twist of fate that had taken her hands, recoiled from the idea of accepting help wrapped in the fiction of matrimony. "This is not right," she whispered. "Marriage should be about love, not convenience." "Maybe," Asher agreed, moving to stand beside her, careful to keep a respectful distance. "But it can also be about partnership, about two people choosing to face the world together instead of alone. My parents had an arranged marriage back in Tennessee. They met on their wedding day. But they built something real over the years, something that grew into love through shared work and shared struggles. I'm not promising you love, Mrs. Morrison, but I am promising you honesty, respect, and my best effort to be a good husband. The rest, well, maybe that comes with time, or maybe it does not. But either way, you will have a roof over your head and food on your table, and I will have someone who understands what it means to fight for something." The sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Trudy felt tears pricking at her eyes, though whether they came from grief or relief or simple exhaustion, she could not say. She thought of Samuel, of the love they had shared, brief as it had been. He had been a good man, a gentle man, dead at 30 from a heart that simply stopped beating one February night. Would he have wanted her to accept this strange proposal? Would he have understood? "I cannot cook," she said finally, lifting her arms slightly to emphasize the stumps. "I cannot sew or clean properly. I cannot do any of the things a wife is supposed to do." "I can cook well enough," Asher said, "and I can hire help for the rest. What I need is someone with a sharp mind and a strong will, someone who knows this land and understands what it takes to survive here. You have both. The rest we will figure out together." Trudy closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her like a physical thing. Every reasonable thought in her head told her to accept, to take this unlikely lifeline and hold on with whatever grip she still possessed. But her heart, that stubborn organ that had already endured so much breaking, hesitated at the threshold of this new unknown. "I need time to think," she said. "Of course." Asher settled his hat back on his head, preparing to mount his horse. "Take all the time you need, but Mrs. Morrison, winter is coming, and it will not wait for either of us to feel ready." He rode away across the darkening prairie, and Trudy stood alone in the gathering twilight, feeling the ghost of Samuel's presence like a whisper against her skin. That night, she lay awake in the bed she had shared with her husband, staring at the ceiling beams he had cut and fitted himself, and made her decision. Survival, she had learned, required sacrifices she had never imagined making. Tomorrow, she would give Asher Reed her answer. The morning came cold and clear, with the first real bite of autumn in the air. Trudy dressed carefully in her best remaining dress, a gray cotton that Samuel had bought her for their first anniversary. She managed the buttons with difficulty, using her teeth and the stumps of her arms in ways that had become grimly familiar over these past months. Her hair, at least, she could still brush by wedging the handle between her arm and body, though the result was far from the neat arrangements she had once achieved. When she looked in the small mirror above her wash basin, she saw a woman aged beyond her years, her face thin and lined with pain, her eyes holding shadows that had not been there when Samuel was alive. She walked the mile to Asher's ranch, refusing to hitch up the wagon she could no longer drive. The Reed property was notably more prosperous than her own, with sturdy fences and a well-built house that spoke of careful planning and hard work. Cattle grazed in the near pasture, sleek and healthy, and the barn looked freshly painted. This was what competent management looked like, what her own land could have been if circumstances had been different. Asher was mending fence near the road when she arrived, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms bronzed by constant sun exposure. He looked up at her approach, and something shifted in his expression, a flash of what might have been hope quickly masked by careful neutrality. "Mrs. Morrison," he greeted, setting down his tools and walking to meet her. "You did not need to come all this way on foot." "I needed the walk," she said simply, "to clear my head and make sure of my decision." He waited, patient as stone, while she gathered her thoughts and her courage. "I will marry you," Trudy said, forcing herself to meet his eyes, "but I have conditions. I will not be treated as an invalid or a burden. I will contribute what I can to the running of this household, and I will expect to be consulted on major decisions regarding the properties. This may be a practical arrangement, but I will not be made to feel like charity." And she paused, feeling her cheeks warm. "I would appreciate separate bedrooms, at least initially. I am not ready for the other aspects of marriage." Asher nodded slowly, his expression serious. "Those terms are acceptable. You will have your own room, and I give you my word that I will never press you for more than you are willing to give. As for the rest, I would not want a wife who did not speak her mind or take an active role in our affairs. I am gaining a partner, not a dependent." "When?" Trudy asked, the single word encompassing all the practical concerns that came with such a decision. "As soon as you are willing. There is a circuit preacher due in Calico next Sunday. We could speak with him then, have the ceremony the following week if you agree. That would give you time to prepare, to gather whatever possessions you want to bring from your place." "What will people say?" The question escaped before Trudy could stop it, and she felt foolish for asking. She had never been one to care overmuch about gossip, but this situation was so unusual, so open to speculation and judgment. "They will say whatever they want regardless of what we do," Asher replied with a slight shrug. "But I think most folks in Calico are decent enough to understand the practicality of the arrangement. And anyone who wants to make trouble about it will have to deal with me." There was something quietly fierce in the way he said it, a protectiveness that surprised Trudy and stirred something in her chest that she was not quite ready to examine. She nodded, feeling the weight of inevitability settling over her like a cloak. "Sunday, then. I will be ready." The week that followed passed in a strange blur of activity and emotion. Trudy went through her small house, deciding what to keep and what to leave behind. So much of it was tied to Samuel, to the life they had briefly shared, and each item she touched seemed weighted with memory. There were his work clothes hanging on pegs by the door, his shaving kit on the shelf, the pipe he had smoked on the porch in the evenings. She boxed these carefully, unable to part with them yet, hoping Asher would understand. Her own possessions were meager. The accident had destroyed most of her clothing, and she had not been able to replace much of it. She had books, a dozen precious volumes that Samuel had given her over their courtship and marriage, knowing how she treasured reading. She had her mother's china, carefully wrapped in newspaper, and a quilt her grandmother had made that bore the stitched names of 5 generations of women. These tangible pieces of her history would come with her to this new life, anchors to who she had been before everything changed. On Wednesday, Mrs. Hutchins from the general store came calling, bringing with her 3 other women from town. Trudy's first instinct was to send them away, assuming they had come to gossip or offer unwanted advice, but Mrs. Hutchins surprised her. "We heard about the upcoming wedding," the older woman said, her weathered face kind beneath her bonnet. "And we thought you might need some help getting ready, seeing as how your situation makes certain preparations difficult." Trudy felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. She had been so isolated these past months, so caught up in her own struggle and grief, that she had forgotten what it meant to be part of a community, even a small and sometimes judgmental one like Calico. "I do not have much to offer by way of hospitality," she began, "but Mrs. Hutchins waved this away. "We brought our own tea and some biscuits. Now, let us see what you have in terms of a wedding dress." The women spent the afternoon going through Trudy's wardrobe, such as it was, and eventually settled on a deep blue dress that had been her Sunday best. With some skilled alterations to make it easier for Trudy to manage with her limited mobility, and the addition of some lace Mrs. Patterson contributed from her own stores, it would serve admirably for the occasion. They chattered as they worked, carefully avoiding any talk of pity or tragedy, instead focusing on the practical aspects of marriage and homemaking. Trudy found herself relaxing slightly, letting their comfortable presence ease some of the anxiety that had been building in her chest. "Asher Reed is a good man," Mrs. Patterson said at one point, threading her needle with practiced efficiency. "A bit quiet, keeps to himself mostly, but honest and hardworking. You could do far worse." "I know," Trudy said softly. "He has been very kind about all of this." "Kind nothing, Mrs. Hutchins snorted. "The man is smart. He is getting himself a wife with more grit than half the men in this territory, and he knows it. Do not sell yourself short, Trudy Morrison. You bring plenty to this marriage, hands or no hands." The words, so bluntly delivered, brought tears to Trudy's eyes. She had felt so diminished these past months, so reduced by her injury and Samuel's death, that she had almost forgotten she was more than just her tragedy. The reminder, coming from these practical frontier women, meant more than she could easily express. Sunday arrived with unseasonable warmth, the sky a brilliant cloudless blue that seemed almost mocking in its beauty. Trudy stood in her small house, dressed in the altered blue dress, her hair arranged as best she could manage with Mrs. Hutchins's help earlier that morning. She looked at herself in the mirror and tried to see what Asher claimed to see, a woman worth marrying for reasons beyond mere pity. All she saw was someone worn down by circumstance, aged beyond her years, marked forever by loss. The sound of a wagon outside pulled her from her melancholy reflection. Asher had come to collect her for the meeting with the preacher. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and walked out to meet her future. Asher climbed down from the wagon seat and stood looking at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. "You look very fine, Mrs. Morrison," he said quietly. "Thank you," she managed, feeling awkwardly formal in her wedding clothes. "You as well." He had clearly made an effort, wearing what must be his best suit, his hair neatly trimmed and his face freshly shaved. He looked younger somehow, less weathered, and Trudy found herself noticing for the first time that he was actually quite handsome in a rugged, understated way. The ride into Calico was quiet, both of them seemingly lost in their own thoughts. Trudy watched the familiar landscape roll by, the scrub brush and scattered pines, the distant mountains purple against the horizon. This was her home, had been since Samuel brought her here as a bride herself 3 years ago. Now she was about to become someone else's bride, entering into a marriage that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with survival. The irony was not lost on her. Reverend Talbot met them at the small whitewashed church on the edge of town, his kind eyes taking in their situation with quiet understanding. He was an itinerant preacher who traveled a circuit through the scattered settlements of central Colorado, bringing religion and civilization to the rough frontier communities. He had buried Samuel, Trudy remembered with a pang, had spoken words of comfort over the grave that winter morning. "Miss Morrison, Mr. Reed," he greeted them warmly. "I understand you wish to be married." "Yes, sir," Asher confirmed, "as soon as can be arranged." The preacher invited them into the church, and they spent an hour discussing the ceremony and what it would entail. Reverend Talbot asked them each privately if they entered into this union freely and of sound mind. When it was Trudy's turn, she found herself hesitating, wondering if she should confess the practical nature of their arrangement. But the preacher's gentle eyes seemed to understand more than she gave him credit for. "Marriage takes many forms, child," he said softly. "What matters is that you treat each other with respect and honesty, that you build something worthwhile together. Love can grow in unexpected places, given time and care. Do not despair of finding happiness just because the beginning is unconventional." His words stayed with her as they planned the ceremony for the following Saturday, giving them 1 week to complete the legal necessities, and for Trudy to finish her preparations. As they left the church, Asher helped her up into the wagon with careful consideration for her limited balance, his hands strong and sure at her waist. The week passed in a flurry of activity. Asher came each day to help Trudy pack and prepare, loading her possessions into his wagon with careful attention to her directions. He worked quietly and efficiently, never commenting on the modest nature of her belongings or the photographs of Samuel she insisted on bringing. When he found the box of Samuel's things, he simply set it aside without question, respecting her need to hold onto pieces of her past. On Thursday evening, as they finished loading the last of the boxes, a sudden storm rolled in from the mountains, the kind of fierce autumn thunderstorm that could turn roads to mud and make travel impossible. Asher looked at the darkening sky with a concerned frown. "I should head back before this hits in earnest," he said, "but I do not like leaving you here alone with the storm coming." "I have weathered many storms in this house," Trudy replied, though truthfully the thought of spending another night alone in the echoing emptiness of her former home filled her with a strange dread. "I will be fine." The first fat drops of rain began to fall, and within moments it became a downpour. Asher cursed softly under his breath and looked around for shelter. "My horse will not make it back in this. Do you mind if I wait it out in your barn?" "Do not be ridiculous," Trudy said, raising her voice to be heard over the hammering rain. "Come inside. I can at least offer you coffee and a dry place to sit." They ran for the house together, arriving breathless and laughing despite themselves at the sheer violence of the weather. Inside, Trudy directed Asher to towels while she attempted to light the stove with her limited dexterity. After watching her struggle for a moment, Asher gently intervened. "Let me," he said, and there was no condescension in his voice, only practical helpfulness. Within minutes, he had a fire going and coffee brewing, moving around her small kitchen with surprising competence. "You really can cook," Trudy observed, settling into a chair at the table. "I have been feeding myself for 6 years," Asher replied with a slight smile. "A man learns or starves. I am no fancy chef, but I can manage the basics well enough." They sat together as the storm raged outside, drinking coffee and talking about the ranch, the combined properties, plans for the spring planting. It was the longest conversation they had ever had, and Trudy found herself surprised by Asher's intelligence and thoughtfulness. He asked her opinion on crop rotation and water rights, actually listening to her answers and incorporating her suggestions into his plans. He treated her like someone whose knowledge had value, whose input mattered, and it was such a relief after months of being treated like a tragic figure to be pitied that Trudy felt something in her chest begin to cautiously unfurl. "Why did you never marry before?" she asked suddenly, the question emerging from her curiosity before she could consider whether it was too personal. Asher was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup as though it held answers to difficult questions. "I came west after the war," he said finally. "I was only 16, but I had seen enough death and destruction to last a lifetime. I wanted to build something, to create instead of destroy. For years, that was enough, just the work and the land and the satisfaction of watching something grow from nothing. I thought about marriage occasionally, but there never seemed to be time, and the few women in the territory were already spoken for or not interested in a rough rancher with nothing but prospects to offer. And now, Trudy asked, what changed? He looked up at her, his dark eyes steady and serious. I am 28 years old. The ranch is established now, successful enough to support a family. And I realize that building something only has meaning if you have someone to build it for, someone to share it with. When I saw you fighting so hard to keep your place going after your husband died, even after the accident, I saw the kind of strength and determination I wanted as part of my life. I know this is not a conventional courtship, Mrs. Morrison, but I hope you will believe me when I say that I am not doing this out of pity or obligation. I am doing it because I genuinely believe we could build something good together. The honesty in his words moved something in Trudy, shifting her understanding of this arrangement ever so slightly. Perhaps there was more here than just cold practicality. Perhaps there was the seed of something that could grow into genuine partnership, maybe even friendship. Love seemed too much to hope for, but the possibility of not facing the future entirely alone was more than she had dared to imagine just a week ago. The storm passed after an hour, leaving the world washed clean and smelling of wet sage. Asher took his leave, riding back to his ranch through the muddy darkness, and Trudy was left alone with her thoughts and the understanding that in 2 more days, everything would change. Saturday morning dawned clear and beautiful, the air crisp with the promise of coming winter. Trudy woke early in her empty house, feeling the strange finality of this last morning as a widow, as the sole inhabitant of this place that held so many memories. She allowed herself a few moments to remember Samuel, to mentally say goodbye to the life they had planned together before fate intervened. Then she rose and began preparing herself for her wedding day. Mrs. Hutchins and the other women arrived mid-morning, bringing food and flowers and an energy that filled the quiet house with life. They helped Trudy dress, arranging her hair and pinning a few wildflowers into the simple arrangement. When she looked at herself in the mirror this time, she saw not just a broken woman but someone on the cusp of a new beginning, however uncertain that beginning might be. The ceremony was set for 2 in the afternoon at the church. Most of Calico turned out for it, whether out of genuine goodwill or simple curiosity, Trudy could not say. She walked down the short aisle on the arm of Tom Jenkins, the livery owner who had been a friend to Samuel, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes upon her. At the front of the church, Asher waited in his dark suit, his expression solemn but his eyes warm as they met hers. Reverend Talbot conducted a simple ceremony, speaking of partnership and commitment, of the courage required to build a life together in this hard land. When it came time for the ring, Asher produced a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother, slipping it carefully onto her right hand since the left was impossible. The metal was warm from his pocket, and it settled onto her finger like a promise. I, Asher Reed, take you, Trudy Morrison, to be my lawfully wedded wife, he said, his voice steady and sure. I promise to honor you, to respect you, to stand by you in all circumstances. I promise to be your partner and your friend, and to work every day to build a life worthy of the courage you have shown. Trudy felt tears prick her eyes at the sincerity in his words. When it was her turn, she spoke her own vows with a voice that only trembled slightly. I, Trudy Morrison, take you, Asher Reed, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to be honest with you, to work beside you, and to honor the partnership we are creating. I promise to try every day to be worthy of the chance you are giving me. I now pronounce you man and wife, Reverend Talbot declared. Mr. Reed, you may kiss your bride. Asher looked at Trudy, a question in his eyes, giving her the chance to refuse this intimacy if she wished. But somehow it seemed important to complete this ritual properly, to seal this strange marriage with the traditional gesture. She nodded slightly, and he leaned down to press a gentle kiss to her lips. It was brief and chaste, over almost before it began, but Trudy felt the touch of it like a brand, marking this moment as the dividing line between her old life and whatever came next. The townspeople threw rice as they emerged from the church into the golden afternoon sunlight, and several families had organized a simple celebration at the community hall. There was food and music, dancing and well wishes, and Trudy found herself caught up in the warmth of it all despite her initial reservations. She watched Asher talking with other ranchers, accepting congratulations with his characteristic quiet dignity, and thought that perhaps this might actually work. Perhaps they could forge something real from this unconventional beginning. As evening fell, it was time to leave for the Reed Ranch, for the home that was now hers as well. Asher helped her into the wagon, now piled with the last of her possessions from the house that had been emptied earlier in the week. As they pulled away from town, Trudy looked back at the little cluster of buildings that represented civilization in this vast territory, feeling both fear and anticipation churning in her stomach. The Reed Ranch looked different somehow as they approached it in the gathering dusk, more welcoming than it had during her previous visits. Warm light spilled from the windows of the house, and Trudy realized that someone had been there earlier to start fires and prepare for their arrival. Asher must have arranged it, ensuring she would not come to a cold and dark house on her wedding night. He carried her boxes and trunks inside, showing her to the room he had prepared for her. It was spacious and clean, with a large bed covered in a beautiful quilt and a dresser with an oval mirror above it. There were even curtains at the window, simple but pretty, and a washstand with a porcelain basin and pitcher. "I hope it suits," Asher said, setting down the last box. "If you need anything different, just let me know." "It is lovely," Trudy said honestly, touched by the care he had clearly taken. "Thank you." An awkward silence fell between them, the weight of the marriage bed question hanging unspoken in the air. Asher cleared his throat, looking suddenly uncomfortable in a way she had not seen before. "I will be in the room down the hall if you need anything," he said. "And I want to remind you of my promise. Nothing will happen between us that you do not freely choose. You have my word on that." "I know," Trudy said softly. "I trust you." The words surprised them both, but Trudy realized as she said them that they were true. She did trust this quiet man who had offered her a way forward when she had none, who looked at her with respect instead of pity, who had kept every promise he had made so far. Asher nodded, a flash of something warm crossing his face. "Good night, then, Mrs. Reed." "Good night, Mr. Reed." He left, closing the door softly behind him, and Trudy was alone in her new room in her new home with her new name. She managed to change into her nightgown with difficulty, a process that still frustrated her with its clumsiness and time consumption. Then she sat on the edge of the bed, looking around at the walls that would contain so much of her life going forward, and tried to understand what she was feeling. Fear, certainly, grief for what had been lost, uncertainty about what was to come. But underneath all of that, barely perceptible but undeniably present, was something that might have been hope. The days that followed established a pattern that gradually became routine. Trudy woke early, struggling into her clothes with the adaptive techniques she had learned. Downstairs, she would find Asher already up, making coffee and preparing breakfast with efficient movements. They would eat together, discussing the day's plans and work that needed doing. Then Asher would head out to tend the cattle and mend fences and do the 1,000 other tasks that kept a ranch running, while Trudy did what she could around the house. It was frustrating beyond measure to be so limited in what she could accomplish. Simple tasks that had once taken minutes now required elaborate workarounds and left her exhausted. But she refused to simply sit idle. She learned to wedge a broom handle and sweep one-handed, to manage dishes by carefully using her arms to stabilize things. She could not knead bread, but she could call out measurements and directions to Asher in the evenings, teaching him her techniques until his loaves rivaled what she had once produced herself. More valuably, she discovered she could still keep books and records, using a special holder Asher fashioned to grip her pencil. She took over the ranch accounting, organizing their finances with a sharp eye for detail that impressed her new husband. She also began drafting plans for the combined properties, thinking strategically about how to maximize their resources and prepare for the coming winter. Asher proved to be a man of his word in every respect. He treated her with unfailing courtesy and respect, never pushing for intimacy or making her feel like less than a full partner in their enterprise. He listened to her opinions, implemented her suggestions, and consulted her on decisions large and small. They developed an easy working relationship built on mutual respect and shared purpose. But there was something else growing between them as well, something neither of them quite acknowledged but both were increasingly aware of. Trudy found herself watching Asher as he worked, admiring the strength in his shoulders and the competent way he handled every challenge. She noticed the kindness in his eyes when he looked at her, the small considerations he offered without drawing attention to them. And sometimes she caught him watching her too, his gaze lingering with an expression she could not quite interpret. October arrived with a cold snap that reminded everyone winter was coming. Asher spent long days preparing the ranch for the brutal months ahead, moving cattle to sheltered pastures and stocking the barn with hay and feed. Trudy helped where she could, her presence beside him a steady constant even when her actual physical contribution was limited. One evening, about 6 weeks after their wedding, they sat together in the parlor after dinner, Asher mending a bridle while Trudy read aloud from one of her precious books. It was a companionable scene, domestic and peaceful, and Trudy found herself thinking how strange it was that this had become her life. Not the life she had imagined, certainly, but perhaps not entirely unwelcome either. "May I ask you something personal?" Asher said suddenly, looking up from his work. "Of course," Trudy replied, marking her place in the book. "Do you ever regret it? Marrying me, I mean. Do you wish you had tried to manage on your own?" The question surprised her with its vulnerability, revealing an uncertainty she had not known he harbored. She considered her answer carefully, wanting to be honest but also kind. "Sometimes I feel guilty," she admitted. "Like I am betraying Samuel's memory by moving forward with my life. And sometimes I feel angry that circumstances forced me into this situation at all. But regret? No. You have given me security and partnership, and you have treated me with more respect and consideration than I had any right to expect. This is not the marriage I dreamed of as a girl, but it is a good marriage nonetheless. I am grateful for it and for you." Something shifted in Asher's expression, a warmth that had not been there before. "I am grateful too," he said quietly. "You have brought life to this house, purpose beyond just survival. I had not realized how lonely I was until you were here." The admission hung between them, honest and raw, and Trudy felt her heart clench with an emotion she was not ready to name. They looked at each other across the lamplit room, and for a moment, the air seemed charged with possibility. Then, Asher returned to his mending and Trudy to her book, but something had changed, shifted infinitesimally toward something deeper than simple partnership. The first real snow came in early November, blanketing the ranch in crystalline white that transformed the landscape into something magical and treacherous in equal measure. Asher was out checking on the cattle when one of the heifers went into difficult labor, requiring him to stay with her through the bitter night to save both mother and calf. He came back to the house at dawn, exhausted and half frozen, his face gray with fatigue. Trudy met him at the door, having stayed awake herself through the long night, worrying when he did not return. "You need hot food and sleep," she said firmly, helping him out of his frozen coat as best she could. "The stock still needs tending," Asher protested, though his voice was weak with exhaustion. "The stock can wait 2 hours while you rest. You will be no good to anyone if you collapse from exposure." She guided him to a chair by the fire, pulling off his frozen boots with difficulty while he sat there too tired to argue. Then she managed to prepare hot coffee and stew left over from the previous night, bringing it to him with a determination that overrode her physical limitations. Asher ate mechanically, his eyes already half closed. When he finished, Trudy touched his shoulder gently with the inside of her elbow. "Go to bed," she said softly. "Just for a few hours. I will wake you if anything urgent comes up." He looked up at her, something naked and unguarded in his exhausted face. "What did I do to deserve you?" he murmured. "You offered me a ring instead of charity," Trudy replied, her voice catching on the emotion rising in her throat. "You gave me back my dignity. Now please go rest." He stumbled up the stairs to his room, and Trudy heard the door close. She stood alone in the warm kitchen, her heart pounding with a feeling she had not allowed herself since Samuel's death. She was falling for her husband. This practical marriage that was supposed to be about survival and mutual benefit was becoming something else entirely, at least for her. Whether Asher felt the same, she could not say, but she could no longer deny the truth of her own heart. The weeks leading up to Christmas were brutally cold, with storms that kept them housebound for days at a time. In the forced intimacy of the warm house while the world outside raged with wind and snow, Trudy and Asher grew closer. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, about their pasts and their hopes for the future, about books and politics, and the price of cattle. They laughed together over small things, developed private jokes, created a shared language of domesticity. Asher taught Trudy to play chess, fashioning special pieces she could move by gripping them between her arms. She taught him about the stars, pointing out constellations through the frosted windows on clear nights. They worked together on a plan to expand the ranch in the spring, combining their knowledge and experience into something better than either could have created alone. And gradually, carefully, they began to touch each other in small ways. A hand on an arm to get attention. A brief touch to the shoulder in passing. Nothing intimate or improper, but small bridges across the physical distance they had maintained. Each touch felt significant to Trudy, charged with a meaning she was still learning to interpret. On Christmas Eve, Trudy worked hard to prepare something special despite her limitations. She directed Asher in making a feast, and she managed to wrap a present for him, a new leather hat she had special ordered from Denver weeks earlier in secret. When she presented it to him that evening, his face lit up with genuine pleasure. "You did not have to do this," he said, turning the quality hat over in his hands. "I wanted to," Trudy replied, "to thank you for everything." "I have something for you as well," Asher said, looking suddenly nervous in a way that was endearing. He produced a small wooden box, carefully crafted and polished to a soft shine. When he opened it, Trudy saw it contained a variety of specialized tools and adaptive devices, things he had clearly made himself in the hours he worked in the barn. "I thought these might help," he explained, showing her each item. "This one is for writing. It straps to your arm and holds the pencil steady. This one is a kind of fork and knife combination that might make eating easier. And this," he pulled out a carefully shaped piece with soft leather straps, "is for grooming. You mentioned once that you missed being able to brush your hair properly." Trudy felt tears streaming down her face before she realized she was crying. The thoughtfulness behind each item, the hours of work he must have spent trying to make her life easier, the care and attention to her specific needs, it all overwhelmed her with emotion she could no longer contain. "I am sorry," Asher said, alarmed by her tears. "I did not mean to upset you." "No," Trudy managed, laughing and crying at once. "These are wonderful. I am just overwhelmed by your kindness. No one has ever done anything like this for me." "I wanted you to have some independence back," Asher said softly. "I know how hard it has been for you, having to rely on others for so much. These are small things, but I hope they might help." Unable to help herself, Trudy stepped forward and leaned her head against his chest, as close to an embrace as she could manage. After a moment's hesitation, Asher wrapped his arms around her carefully, holding her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. They stood there by the Christmas tree he had cut and decorated, holding each other while the fire crackled and the world outside lay silent under its blanket of snow. "Trudy," Asher whispered into her hair, and the use of her first name sent a thrill through her. He had always called her Mrs. Reed or Mrs. Morrison, maintaining a careful formality. This felt different, intimate in a way nothing else had been. She pulled back slightly to look up at him, and what she saw in his face made her breath catch. His dark eyes were full of longing and tenderness, and something that looked very much like love. "I know we married for practical reasons," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "But I need you to know that what I feel for you now is anything but practical. I am in love with you, Trudy. Completely, hopelessly in love with you. If that is not welcome, if you still see this as purely an arrangement, then I will never mention it again and we can continue as we have been. But I could not let another day pass without telling you the truth." The words hung between them, weighted with significance and risk. Trudy's heart was racing, her mind spinning with the implications of this confession. She thought of Samuel, of the guilt she had felt at moving forward with her life. But she also thought of the past 3 months, of the partnership and respect and growing affection she had found with this good man. Samuel was gone, taken by forces beyond her control. But she was still alive, and she was allowed to live, to love again, to build a future from the ashes of her past. "It is welcome," she whispered, her voice shaking with emotion. "More than welcome. I love you too, Asher. I did not think I could feel this way again, but you have shown me that my heart is not as broken as I thought. You have been patient and kind and honorable, and I have fallen completely in love with you." The kiss that followed was nothing like the chaste brush of lips at their wedding. This was deep and passionate, full of all the longing and feeling they had been holding back. Asher cradled her face in his hands like she was something precious, and Trudy leaned into him with all the trust and desire she had been too afraid to acknowledge until now. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Asher rested his forehead against hers. "I do not want to pressure you," he said. "I know we agreed to separate rooms, and that does not have to change unless you want it to." "I want it to change," Trudy said firmly. "I want to be your wife in every sense of the word. I am ready, Asher. I want to share your life completely." The joy that lit his face was beautiful to see, and he kissed her again, slower this time, savoring the moment. Then he swept her up in his arms, carrying her up the stairs to his bedroom, to the marriage bed that would finally be theirs to share. That night, they came together with tenderness and passion, creating something new from the ruins of their separate griefs, building a foundation of love that would sustain them through whatever the future held. The harsh Colorado winter gradually gave way to spring, and with it came new life in every sense. The combined properties thrived under their joint management, proving even more successful than either had hoped. Trudy found that the adaptive tools Asher had created, combined with her determination and his steady support, allowed her to reclaim much of the independence she thought she had lost forever. She learned to dress herself more efficiently, to manage most household tasks with creative modifications, and to contribute meaningfully to every aspect of their lives together. But more importantly, their marriage flourished in ways neither had dared to imagine that first awkward day when Asher had proposed his practical arrangement. They were deeply, joyfully in love, and that love colored everything they did. They worked side by side during the long spring days, preparing fields for planting and tending the new calves. They spent evenings in comfortable companionship, reading aloud or planning their future. And they spent nights in each other's arms, learning the contours of love and intimacy with the wonder of people who had found something unexpected and precious. In late spring, Trudy began to suspect she might be pregnant. The signs were subtle at first, but as a woman who had longed for children during her first marriage, she recognized them quickly. When she was finally certain, she chose a quiet evening to tell Asher, leading him out to the porch where they often sat to watch the sunset. "I have news," she said, unable to keep the smile from her face despite her nervousness about his reaction. "We are going to have a child." The expression that crossed Asher's face was one of pure wonder, joy, and awe mixed with a touch of fear. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "As certain as I can be without seeing a doctor, but yes, I am quite sure, probably due sometime in late autumn." Asher pulled her into his arms, holding her with a fierceness that spoke of deep feeling. "A baby," he murmured against her hair. "Our baby. I never thought I would have this, a real family of my own." "Are you happy about it?" Trudy asked, needing to hear the words. "Happy does not begin to describe it," Asher replied, pulling back to look at her with eyes that shone with unshed tears. "You have given me everything I never knew I needed, Trudy. A home, a purpose, love, and now this. I cannot imagine anything more perfect." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer months. Trudy bloomed with the new life growing inside her, her face losing the drawn look of grief and hardship that had marked it when they first married. Asher was attentive to the point of being overprotective, constantly worried about her overexerting herself given her physical limitations. But Trudy insisted on maintaining her role in running the ranch, refusing to be treated as an invalid just because she was expecting. They spent long evenings discussing names and making plans for the nursery. Asher built a beautiful cradle from oak, sanding and finishing it to a smooth perfection. Mrs. Hutchins and the other women from town organized a quilting bee, creating a magnificent coverlet for the new baby with squares contributed by everyone in the community. Trudy felt embraced by the support of their neighbors in a way she had not experienced since before Samuel's death. In late October, as the aspens turned to gold and the air grew crisp with the promise of winter, Trudy's labor began. It was long and difficult, made more complicated by her inability to grip or brace herself normally. The doctor from Denver had come to stay for the final weeks, anticipating complications, and his presence proved crucial. For 12 hours, Trudy labored with Asher holding her, supporting her, whispering encouragement and love into her ear. Finally, as dawn broke over the mountains, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that spoke of strong lungs and a fierce will to live. The doctor placed him in Trudy's arms, and she looked down at the red, squalling infant with a love so overwhelming it took her breath away. "A son," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Asher, we have a son." Asher was crying too, unashamed of the tears as he looked at his wife and child with an expression of such profound love and gratitude that Trudy knew she would remember this moment for the rest of her life. "He is perfect," Asher said hoarsely. "Absolutely perfect. Thank you, Trudy. Thank you for this gift." They named him Andrew Samuel Reid, honoring both his father and the man who had been Trudy's first husband. It felt right to acknowledge the past while celebrating the future, to recognize that love could exist in multiple forms without diminishing any of them. The months that followed were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Caring for an infant with limited hand function presented challenges Trudy had not fully anticipated, but Asher was there every step of the way, sharing the night feedings and diaper changes, helping her figure out how to nurse and hold the baby safely. They developed a partnership in parenting that was just as strong as their partnership in every other aspect of their lives. Andrew thrived, growing into a healthy, happy baby who seemed to inherit his father's steady temperament and his mother's determined spirit. Watching Asher with their son, seeing the gentle way he handled the tiny infant and the pride that shone in his eyes, made Trudy fall even more deeply in love with her husband. This man who had offered her a ring instead of charity had given her so much more than security. He had given her a future filled with love and purpose and joy. As winter settled over the ranch once more, Trudy reflected on how much had changed in the year since Asher had first approached her with his unusual proposal. She had gone from desperate widow facing an impossible future to beloved wife and mother, from someone diminished by loss to someone fulfilled by love. The absence of her hand still limited her in many ways, still frustrated her with its daily challenges. But she had learned that she was so much more than what she had lost. With Asher beside her and Andrew in her arms, she had everything that truly mattered. One evening in December, almost exactly a year since that Christmas when they had first confessed their love, Trudy and Asher sat together by the fire while Andrew slept peacefully in his cradle. They had been discussing plans for the ranch in the coming year, talking about expanding their herd and perhaps hiring additional help now that they had the baby to care for. "You remember that first day I came to you with my proposal?" Asher asked suddenly, his arm around Trudy's shoulders as she leaned against him. "I remember thinking you had lost your mind," Trudy admitted with a laugh. "Marriage seemed like such a strange solution to my problems." "I was terrified you would refuse," Asher confessed. "I tried to make it sound practical and businesslike, but the truth was I had been half in love with you already, just from watching your courage and determination. I hoped that maybe, if I could convince you to give me a chance, we might find something real together." "You were in love with me even then?" Trudy asked, pulling back to look at him in surprise. "From the moment I saw you standing at Samuel's grave, refusing to let grief destroy you," Asher said simply. "You were the strongest person I had ever met. I wanted that strength as part of my life." "I wanted you." "I am glad you did," Trudy said softly. "I am glad you had the courage to ask, even though it was unconventional. You saved me, Asher, not just from poverty and hardship, but from losing myself completely to grief and bitterness. You reminded me that life goes on, that there is still beauty and love and purpose to be found even after terrible loss." "We saved each other," Asher corrected, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I was so lonely before you came, so focused on work that I did not realize how empty my life was. You brought light and warmth and meaning to everything. You made my house a home." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire dance and listening to their son's soft breathing. Outside, snow was beginning to fall, but inside they were warm and safe and together. "I have been thinking," Trudy said eventually, "about expanding the house next spring, adding a few more rooms." "Planning for more children?" Asher asked with a smile in his voice. "I hope so," Trudy admitted, "if we are blessed with them. I want Andrew to have siblings, to grow up surrounded by family. I want to fill this house with love and laughter and life." "That sounds perfect," Asher agreed, his hand finding hers, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that had become second nature despite her truncated limbs. "Whatever you want, we will make it happen. Together." The years that followed brought both challenges and blessings in abundance. The ranch continued to prosper, becoming one of the most successful operations in central Colorado. Asher and Trudy's reputation for fair dealing and innovative practices spread, and other ranchers began seeking their advice on everything from water conservation to breeding stock. Andrew grew into a sturdy, cheerful toddler who delighted in following his father around the ranch, learning about cattle and horses from the time he could walk. In 1886, Trudy gave birth to twin girls, Alice and Anne, who arrived during a spring thunderstorm and proved to be as different as night and day despite their identical appearances. Alice was quiet and thoughtful like her father, while Anne was bold and adventurous, always getting into mischief. Trudy had worried during her second pregnancy about managing twins given her limitations, but Asher hired a young woman from town to help with household tasks, freeing Trudy to focus on the children and the ranch management she had proven so skilled at. The arrangement worked beautifully, and Sarah Jenkins became almost part of the family, bringing her own cheerful energy to the bustling household. In 1888, another son arrived, Thomas, named for Trudy's father who had passed away before she moved west. Thomas was a serious baby who rarely cried but watched everything with intense curiosity. Asher joked that he was going to be a scholar, not a rancher, and indeed, Thomas showed an early affinity for books and learning that reminded Trudy of herself. Managing 4 children while running a successful ranch should have been overwhelming, but somehow it all worked. Asher was an involved father who shared every aspect of childcare and never made Trudy feel inadequate because of her physical limitations. The children grew up understanding that their mother was different but never seeing her as less capable. They learned early how to help her with small tasks, and more importantly, they learned that determination and creativity could overcome almost any obstacle. The community of Calico grew around them, transforming from a rough frontier settlement into a proper town with a school and a church, and even a small library that Trudy helped establish. She and Asher became pillars of the community, known for their generosity and willingness to help neighbors in need. Trudy particularly devoted herself to helping other women who faced hardship, whether from widowhood or illness, or simply the grinding difficulty of frontier life. She knew firsthand what it meant to face impossible circumstances, and she never forgot the kindness that had saved her. As Andrew grew older, he showed a natural aptitude for ranching that filled Asher with quiet pride. Father and son developed a close bond built on mutual respect and shared love of the land. Andrew understood from an early age that his parents' marriage had begun as a practical arrangement, and he loved the story of how his father had offered his mother a ring instead of charity, how they had built love from partnership. The twins grew into beautiful, intelligent young women who attracted attention from every unmarried man within 50 miles. Alice married a schoolteacher from Denver and moved to the city, while Anne shocked everyone by deciding to become a veterinarian, one of the first women in Colorado to pursue such a profession. Asher and Trudy supported both choices, having learned that love meant letting children forge their own paths. Thomas did indeed become a scholar, earning a place at a university back east. But he surprised everyone by returning to Colorado after his education, determined to use his knowledge to help improve ranching practices and water management across the territory. He took over much of the business management of the ranch, freeing Asher to focus on the hands-on work he loved. Through all the years and changes, Trudy and Asher's love never wavered. If anything, it deepened with time, seasoned by shared joys and sorrows, by the daily work of building a life together. They knew each other's thoughts with a glance, moved in harmony that came from years of partnership, and still found pleasure in each other's company after decades of marriage. On a warm evening in the summer of 1905, they sat together on the porch of the house they had expanded and improved over the years, watching the sun set over the mountains that had framed their entire life together. Andrew was managing the ranch now, with his own family living in a house they had built on the southern section of the property. The grandchildren were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying across the evening air. Trudy was 66 years old now, her dark hair silvered and her face lined with age, but still beautiful in Asher's eyes. Her stumps no longer pained her as they once had, and she had become so adept with the various adaptive tools Asher had created and improved over the years that she barely thought about her limitations anymore. They were simply part of who she was, no more defining than any other physical characteristic. Asher was 70, his hair completely white now, and his face weathered by decades of outdoor work. But he was still strong and capable, still rising before dawn to check on the cattle, still finding satisfaction in the daily work of maintaining what they had built together. "You ever think about that day I proposed to you?" Asher asked, his hand finding Trudy's as it always did, their fingers interlacing with the ease of long habit. "Sometimes," Trudy admitted. "I think about how terrified I was, how desperate. I thought my life was over, that I had nothing left to offer anyone. I could not have imagined all of this." She gestured at the prosperous ranch, the playing grandchildren, the evidence of a life fully lived. "I knew," Asher said softly. "Even then, I could see what you could not. I saw a woman of incredible strength and courage who deserved a chance to show what she was capable of. I am grateful every day that you took that chance on me. You gave me my life back," Trudy said, her voice thick with emotion even after all these years. "More than that, you gave me a better life than I ever dreamed possible. You saw me when I was invisible, valued me when I felt worthless. You loved me when I thought I could never be loved again." "It was the easiest thing in the world," Asher replied, bringing her hand to his lips in a gesture that still made her heart flutter. "Loving you has been the great privilege of my life." They sat in peaceful silence as the stars began to emerge, bright points of light in the darkening sky. Their children were grown and happy, pursuing their own dreams while staying connected to the family that had nurtured them. Their grandchildren represented a future extending beyond their own lives, carrying forward the legacy of love and determination they had worked so hard to establish. Trudy thought about the twisting path that had brought her to this moment. The joy of her first marriage to Samuel, brief as it had been, the crushing grief of his death and the horror of her accident, the desperation and despair that had nearly destroyed her. And then Asher, offering not charity but partnership, not pity but respect, seeing value where she saw only brokenness. Their marriage had begun as a practical solution to an impossible problem, but it had become so much more. They had built not just a successful ranch but a life of meaning and purpose. They had created a family rooted in love and mutual support. They had proven that circumstances did not define destiny, that loss did not preclude new joy, that endings could also be beginnings. As the last light faded from the sky and the mountains became dark silhouettes against the stars, Trudy leaned her head on Asher's shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. She thought of all the days and nights they had shared, all the challenges they had overcome together, all the moments of ordinary happiness that had accumulated into a lifetime of contentment. "I love you," she whispered, the words as true now as they had been that first Christmas when she had finally allowed herself to speak them. "I love you too," Asher replied, his arm tightening around her. "Always and forever, my darling, always and forever." In the distance, a coyote called to the rising moon, its wild voice a reminder that they lived in a land that demanded courage and persistence. But inside the circle of their love, surrounded by the evidence of everything they had built together, Trudy and Asher felt only gratitude. They had taken the broken pieces of their separate lives and forged them into something beautiful and enduring. They had turned a practical arrangement into a love story for the ages. The years continued to pass with the steady rhythm of seasons changing and life moving forward. Asher and Trudy grew old together with the grace that comes from deep love and mutual respect. They celebrated the marriages of their grandchildren and eventually welcomed great-grandchildren into the world. The ranch that had been started with such practical considerations became a legacy spanning generations, each one adding their own contributions while honoring the foundation that Asher and Trudy had established. Andrew proved himself an excellent steward of the land, implementing Thomas's innovative ideas while maintaining the core values his parents had instilled. The twins visited regularly, Alice bringing her city sophistication, and Anne her groundbreaking veterinary knowledge, both women showing by their success that the determination and courage they had learned from their mother could carry them anywhere they wanted to go. On a cold winter morning in 1912, Asher did not wake up. He had gone peacefully in his sleep, his hand still reaching toward Trudy's side of the bed in the gesture that had characterized their entire life together. He was 77 years old and had lived every one of those years with integrity and purpose, but none more fully than the 29 he had spent as Trudy's husband. The grief was profound, but somehow bearable, because it was grief for a life fully lived and completely shared. Trudy mourned the loss of her partner, her love, her best friend, but she also celebrated all that they had been to each other. At the funeral, surrounded by their large family and the community they had helped build, she spoke about the man who had seen her value when she could not see it herself, who had offered her a ring instead of charity and given her back her future. "He saved me," she told the assembled crowd, her voice steady despite her tears. "But more than that, he saw me. When I was invisible to myself, diminished by loss and injury, he looked at me and saw someone worthwhile, someone capable, someone deserving of love and partnership. He gave me the chance to prove that I was more than my circumstances, and then he stood beside me every day as I did exactly that. I loved him beyond measure, and I will be grateful for the gift of our life together until my last breath." Trudy lived for 7 more years, remaining active and engaged until the end. She saw her grandchildren graduate from schools and start families of their own. She helped manage the ranch well into her 80s, her sharp mind and accumulated wisdom making her an invaluable advisor. And every evening, she sat on the porch where she and Asher had spent so many peaceful hours together, feeling his presence beside her as clearly as if he still lived. When she finally passed in the spring of 1919 at the age of 80, it was peacefully and surrounded by the enormous family she and Asher had created. Her last words were reported to be, "I am coming, my love. Wait for me," spoken with a smile on her face. They buried her beside Asher on a hill overlooking the ranch, the two of them together as they had been for nearly 3 decades in life. The headstone bore simple words that captured the essence of their remarkable story. Asher and Trudy Reed, partners in life, united in love. They built something beautiful together. The ranch continued for generations, each successive owner adding their chapter to the story, but always remembering the foundation laid by that original partnership. The tale of how Asher had offered Trudy a ring instead of charity, how they had built love from practicality and turned loss into legacy, became part of family legend. It was told and retold at gatherings and celebrations, a reminder that love comes in many forms, and that sometimes the most beautiful stories begin with the simplest offer of partnership and respect. The land they had tamed and nurtured continued to thrive, sustaining the family they had created and standing as testament to what could be accomplished when two people chose to face the world together instead of alone. Their story became part of the larger narrative of the American West, of people who came to a hard land with nothing but determination and built lives of meaning and purpose through sheer will and mutual support. And if sometimes visitors to the ranch reported seeing two figures sitting together on the porch at sunset, hand in hand as they watched the mountains turn purple in the fading light, well, those who knew the story smiled and said nothing. Some loves, after all, transcend even death, enduring in the land they nurtured and the legacy they left behind. Asher and Trudy Reed had proven that practical arrangements could blossom into profound love, that loss did not preclude new joy, and that offering respect instead of pity could change not just one life but generations yet to come. Their story ended not with tragedy but with triumph, not with loneliness but with connection, not with despair but with hope fulfilled beyond all expectation. They had lived fully, loved deeply, and left behind something that would endure long after they were gone. In the end, that was the greatest legacy of all,